Robin Miller, co-creator of Myst and Riven.
So when you were obviously this was a game you made with your brother. How was that working relationship, and how is it today? I have a younger brother, and I love him, but spending too much time together can kind of be a little frictiony, you know?
Yeah. When we were making Myst, I think we were almost like best friends. We worked really, really well together, and we had a blast. We laughed a lot. It was a really great relationship. We did not have the pressures of being a company, or having any outside voices, having a lot of fans, having any expectations, whether it be financial or otherwise. So that was nice. And that changed, I think, over the years. And even at the next product, Riven, those expectations became great. Myst was such a success that there was a lot of voices, and that changed the dynamic between Rand and I. So Rand and I we have a good relationship. It's not the same as it was when we made Myst. So we have the typical brother relationship, but it's complex.
Going back to the game development days in the late 80s, early 90s, there was really, relatively don't have a lot of information of access. I mean, I remember there were some game companies when the Super Nintendo came out in the mid 90s, and UK developers, grabbing one from Japan and figuring out how to code for it. Back in your days, there was no game engine. It's like there was no Unreal Unity. There was no universal engine everyone used. It was like their own proprietary engine.
Exactly.
So what's it been like seeing that development process evolve? And was there stuff you would have killed to have now that you wanted when you were making this back in the early 90s?
Yeah, I mean, if we were making it today, it would be totally different. Back when we made it, of course, we used this thing called HyperCard, which made our jobs a lot easier. In a way, it was an engine, and it was the only reason we were able to make Myst, because we weren't incredibly skilled programmers. It was a tool. It was a construction toolkit. And it was what allowed us to put this thing together so quickly and easily. But, if we were able to use something like an Unreal Engine back then, let's say it existed, Myst would have been an entirely different world. And that would have been like a dream come true. But we took the tools that existed at the time. We really just were tool users. And that's all we did. We just scrounged for tools, and we were really good at that. From our very first product we ever did, our first children's products, we just used tools and worked as creative as we could be with those tools. And when Myst came along, that's what we did again. We just used every tool we could find, and then we're as creative as we could be with those tools. And like I said, there was not an Unreal Engine, but there were other tools that were not very sophisticated by today's standards, but back when we came out with Myst, they were very sophisticated, and that's what allowed us to do it.
Now, did you have to, I know with certain developers with certain games, this is a little more mid-90s, but certain developers had to rent out specific stations or computer setups from companies because their home computer or their office computers couldn't do a lot of what digitized sprites that could do. You'd had to rent a whole, I'm just talking to the creator of Abe's Odyssey. He's like, we had to rent a huge office where we had to do all the stuff, the visuals. We had to do it really fast because it was really expensive to rent it out per hour, like $5,000 an hour or something ridiculous to get these sprites into the game and to where we could actually use them. Do you have to use any technology like that? Or was everything made basically at home using the technology available to you?
Yeah, interesting. No, we did it all at home on our Macs. We bought many Macs. I had to do a lot of rendering, and I had on my desktop, or on my actual physical desktop, okay, my physical desk, I had 3 high-powered Macs sitting there, and I would set up all of these models to be rendered on all 3 of them. And then I would press go, I would like render a bunch on one computer, render a bunch on another computer, and then go render a bunch on the other computer. So I was constantly flipping back and forth between these 3 different computers. And that was just to get power. And they were not connected one to the other because that didn't exist back then. I didn't have that capability. It was just me moving from one to the next. And actually, now that I think of it, that I only had to do that because we were very close to the end of the game, and we lost an entire age's worth of work by crashed hard drive. So we were actually on schedule and everything, but then when this had happened, we weren't making backups, and everything, it was horrible. It was a horrifying feeling to have lost that much data and had to start from scratch, setting up cameras, everything, and then had to just like rush through, trying to re-render all this stuff with 3 computers.
It's funny because you say you didn't have any backups. Was that had to have been a financial thing, because I remember how expensive technology was in the late 80s, early 90s back then. Even like a 20 megabyte backup stick wasn't even a stick. It was hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah. Or tape DLT, right?
Yeah. And we were strapped financially, and we were constantly counting, dollars for every single thing. I think after that we got backups. Anyway, we realized backups are a good idea. Okay. We had to rush through on those remaining images.
And then obviously, 1990 was a big year for point-click adventure games, particularly LucasArts adventure games kind of took off from that year with The Secret of Monkey Island as well as other ones. Did you and your brother play those? Did you draw inspiration from those? Did you know anyone who worked at LucasArts? Because I know it was a very tight clique back then with programmers.
No, I never played any of those games and didn't know anybody at LucasArts. So, and I don't think Rand did either. We didn't, it was all happening so fast. It wasn't that I didn't want to play them or wasn't interested. It was just that there was actually just fairly few amount of years before we had gone from our children's games into Myst. And so we really didn't have time to kind of get into all of these other games that were coming out. And we weren't playing mini games at all. By the time we'd stopped making children's games, we weren't out there experimenting with all the other games that were out. We just jumped into making Myst and started, and did it.
I think that's really interesting, because I think nowadays people draw inspiration from old games and new games and they play them and stuff like that. But back in the day, it was so time consuming and expensive that you didn't have time to play these other games. Me personally, I don't even think we had a PC in my household until 95 or 96, and it just barely ran anything. You know what I mean? It couldn't even run Duke Nukem 3D.
Right.
And it had to go into DOS and all this stuff. It wasn't until now, if you can buy a beautiful system for under $800. You know what I mean? It's insane how crazy technology has been reducing the cost of all this stuff and making it simpler for developers and gamers to just experience the game anywhere they want to.
Yeah. In fact, I thought a lot about this because I don't think you can make games anymore and not have played, all the other games that are out there. I think you need to have an understanding of the other work that's gone before you. It's just like if you're going to make films, you've got to know, you've got to have a broad understanding of the other films that have come before you. It's because you're building on all of this broader vernacular. And we didn't, we had played a few earlier games, like Zork, but that's not really, not right. But we weren't avid gamers. And I think Rand knew a little bit more than me. I was just downright ignorant in terms of games. But I think that somewhat worked to our advantage because we were wanting to create something completely different and new. And more cinematic and strictly visual, and with an interface that was cinematic and really relied on story. So I don't think you could do this. We were in a unique position in time that we could get away with that, because there frankly just weren't a lot of games out. I just don't think I don't think anybody can get away with that nowadays, because the competition is insane. You need to be educated. You need to know what's out there.
I also think it's incredibly, it's interesting because Myst, I played Myst very, very little growing up. My uncle was an engineer and he had a computer that could run it. He'd always have to set everything up for me because I couldn't access the program. It wasn't like click and open. It was like you had to go into DOS and type it in and launch it. But I didn't have the cognitive ability to play it. But everyone knows what Myst is. Myst, it's that fantasy game. Yeah, I've heard about. They've either heard of it or they've seen it or they've played it briefly. Like it's cemented its way into video game, like essentially culture and history. So like, Robin, when you were making that game, did you ever think it would like get to that point where you like? I know obviously that's a standard question a lot of people ask, but I mean, you like we want this to be huge and be remembered forever, that kind of stuff.
It's insane that it's at that point. It's taken on this life of its own. Rand and I were there, and all we meant to create was this game. We were funded, and that was exciting, and we meant to create this little world, this little game, but we never in a million years how could we expect that it would have this community, for example, that there would be people 25 years later doing artwork and writing stories, and that you could search it up on the internet, which didn't exist when we made it, and you would just find endless examples of everything, which all of that, if you combine the amount of work that goes into all of that, it's much more than the amount of work that went into Myst. So I am so humbled and also like incredibly proud of the fact that, Rand and I were there at the beginning of this thing, that we kind of pushed it forward, and now that it's expanded into this massive entity, like what is Myst really? It's no longer that game. It's this community, and all of these works made by hundreds of fans and people, and a Lego island that looks like Myst or whatever it is, and it's really cool to have been a part of that. That's really an awesome thing to have been a part of that.
Now, another question I have for you is about the development, about the music in particular. I know back in that time period, it was some of these computers you had to produce music very differently than you do obviously today. And I know for example, like Monkey Island, doing the music for that was a big process where the composer had like a million things in his office all hooked up to like multiple computers, and they had to go to different computers to get different sounds. What was it like composing that music in your garage on your computer?
It was really actually probably not as difficult as it was for the guy from Monkey Island, because we were not using a sound generator in a computer. We just actually recorded it and sampled it. So we recorded it traditionally, and then those were all put onto the CD. We couldn't afford a lot of recording equipment, but I had one synthesizer that was on my keyboard, and then I had a separate recording unit or computer, I should say, that I recorded everything on. It was a blast to do because I didn't get to write music. It was like I didn't get to compose music, but we were never intending to compose music for the thing. That was something that came along later. We had the idea, okay, yeah, actually, you know what? Myst does need music. And we gave it a try. I wrote one piece, we put it into the environment, and we felt like, this works. This is going, this feels right. This feels good. And so I started working on more and more music. And, but the actual technical hurdle wasn't as difficult as it would have been for a lot of composers who were using, say, an onboard processor, on an onboard synth. So, but it wasn't. The story there was, you know, the way it was just so ridiculous. Everything about the way we had to compose that music. Like, you know, I had my keyboard set up across the desk from the accountant, and there was no space to do it. There was no time to do it. I had to do the whole thing in 2 weeks at night, and it was just like this ridiculous crunched, you know, amount of everything was crunched and budgeted, and there, because it was not arranged in the beginning. It was not something that we ever set out to, or something is not something we ever planned to do. So it was still something that was kind of a crazy story.
So Robin, do you have the same computer or hard drive that you had the original source code of Myst on? Do you still own that? Is it in storage? Did you toss it? Did you move it to something more modern?
No, I mean, I don't have hardly any. I think Rand might have that.
It's in the.
I think Rand has the
trailer.
original Mac. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't have that. Yeah. Making a game is not the same thing as playing a game, but for me, that's actually really, really important, and it's something I felt strongly while making Myst and Riven. Obviously, there's a lot of work involved, and arduous work, painful work, but making Myst and making Riven, or doing it, actually any creative thing, is really similar to playing the game, and especially making the games, in that it was very similar to exploring a world. Like, that's kind of what we got out of it, is making Myst was so similar to exploring those worlds, and it's almost what drives me to create any fiction world. Is it's like you're visiting that place, or escaping to that place. So it is the quintessential, like, it is the greatest way you can possibly escape to a world, is to make one. So much better than to just play a game. And I remember specifically the moment we were finished with Riven, I didn't want to play Riven. I had no desire to ever go there again. I haven't played Riven since Riven was finished, because making Riven was the journey. And the same thing with Myst. I have not played Myst for years, but making it was such, and I know Rand would say the exact same thing. It really, you know, so anyway, I just wanted to kind of throw that in.
So Robin, your game, Myst released in '93, if I remember correctly, and then a year later, PlayStation came out and it was ported to the PlayStation. Did you guys have anything to do with that port, or did like a publisher come to you and say, we want to port your game for you?
Publisher, and we had two separate publishers. One in Japan, Sunsoft of Japan, and that was who funded Myst. We had another publisher in the US, Broderbund, who isn't in business anymore.
Oh, interesting. That's cool stuff. What did you and your brother think? I mean, obviously, Nintendo had been out for a while, the Famicom and the regular Nintendo in the United States. In 1990, the Super Nintendo released, 1988, Sega Genesis. You're starting to get these like consoles that were a lot of pixel art. Did you and your brother look at those and think, you know, maybe we could make a game on this at any time? What were your just thoughts as a game designer and coder on those home consoles at the time? So
just, you mean on the console game machines that...
Oh yeah, just in general, because I know, like, obviously you're a PC gamer, your game was designed on PC, you knew how to code on PC, and then all these consoles were starting to pop up out of the woodwork, and kids were playing them, a lot of pixel art stuff, but... Yeah,
I don't think we even looked at them. I mean, in fact, I remember the first time I saw, we got a console game, you know, machine, and it just like, the only thing that I was focused on was making Myst style games, continue to make those style games. Almost to a fault, that was the only thing I was focused on. So yeah, it didn't really, Myst was starting to be ported to so many different game machines. And one concern I had at a point in time was like, oh my gosh, we're losing grasp of this. I have no idea the quality. This is so out of control. And I would see every once in a while, I'd see one of these things and it was really shitty. And that was, it was lost to us. And, but I'm totally not answering your question now.
It's okay.
But yeah, I guess that was our focus, was making exploratory worlds, and we weren't going anywhere else at that point.
The PC, we were focused on the PC basically. That was
We totally were. We totally were. Yeah.
So Robin, I'm curious, did you, after the game's massive reception, were you approached by Hollywood people for either a television show or a feature film back in the mid 90s? Did that ever come up at all with your company and your publisher?
Yeah, two things. Actually, we did approach Myst cinematically. That was something that was intentional. So first that. Secondly, yes, we were approached like crazy. So much so that there was a feeding frenzy to turn it into a film. There was a bidding war. It scared us to death. We thought, wait, what do all of these people, what are they even bidding on? There was nothing, we were so confused that we backed out. Maybe ignorantly so. Maybe we were smart about backing out, but we just backed away and said, hold on, let's just not do this right now.
Well, judging by the quality of video game movie adaptations in the early 90s, it probably was a good call.
Right, yeah. And so it's fascinating that it was a first really intriguing brush with Hollywood. To see that happen when we didn't even know that there was anything there to make a movie out of. But Myst was so big, it was so huge, and that I think a lot of people were just like, oh my God, we've got to get Myst. We've got to get Myst. So yeah, it just built like a snowball, and then we walked out of its way.
That's crazy. That's amazing to hear that. It's really fun to. I'm kind of glad you did step back, because it probably would have been not your vision, not your story. It would have been terrible Hollywood. What do they Hollywoodize it? I think is what they call it now. Get Hollywoodized.
Yes. Well, hey, it might happen again. I mean, there's going to be this other Myst thing going on, so we'll see what happens there.
So
hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers. I hope it's going to turn out good. So